Little Stuart. Stuart Little, the tiny, spirited boy who happened to look exactly like a mouse, found himself suffering from a very big problem: boredom. He sat atop the tallest globe in the little family's living room, a place most humans found dauntingly high, but which Stuart considered merely a fine afternoon perch. Down below, the world of the little family was in perfect order. Mrs. Little was knitting a tiny red sweater for a doll, or perhaps Stuart, should he spill tea. Mr. Little was meticulously polishing his spectacles. Their son, George, was diligently doing his homework, his oversized pencil looking like a felled log next to Stuart. "It's all so large and settled," Stuart murmured to himself, his voice a fine squeak that only the most attentive ear could catch. "The world is full of giants and fixed furniture. There must be places built for the little things, places that are lost because they are simply too small to be seen." Stuart was an adventurer at heart. He loved the freedom of the city streets, the thrill of sailing his boat, the wasp on the pond, and the satisfaction of navigating the enormous, treacherous landscape of a kitchen counter. But lately, he felt his unique skill set, his size, his speed, and his incredible ingenuity was going unused. He hopped down from the globe, slid down the twine Mrs. Little used as a convenient climbing rope, and made his way to his secret drawer in George's desk. There, tucked inside a silver thimble, was his most prized and mysterious possession, the sky compass. The sky compass was the size of a copper penny, made of shimmering, tarnished bronze. It didn't point north, south, east, or west. Its needle, instead of pointing to the magnetic pole, pointed to the location of the small and lost. It vibrated when held, and its tiny crystal face would glow blue when it sensed a great, valuable miniature object that had slipped through the cracks of the human world. Just then, a hurried, slightly frantic knock echoed from the front door. Mr. Little answered it, and a voice, young, anxious, and high-pitched, burst into the hallway. "Mr. Little, I must apologize, but I am desperate. I've lost everything. I need your help." The visitor was a young man named Henry. Henry was an aspiring scientist, barely out of college, who specialized in inventing tiny, powerful devices. He was perhaps the only giant Stuart knew who truly understood the power of the small. Henry wrung his hands. "It's gone. My life's work. The microfusion battery. I had it in a special case, no bigger than a thumbnail, and I know I had it with me in the Great Central Library this afternoon. It must have slipped out. If that battery falls into the wrong hands, or even the wrong drain pipe, the power it holds could cause chaos." The microfusion battery was Henry's masterpiece, a power source that could run a small car for a decade, all contained in a case the size of a single dried bean. Stuart, listening from the bottom of the banister, felt the sky compass in his pocket suddenly begin to thrum. He pulled it out. The crystal face flared a brilliant electric blue, and the compass needle spun wildly, before settling down, pointing directly out the front window and toward the towering, silent structure of the Great Central Library. The greatest small thing, lost in the largest place of human knowledge. The challenge Stuart craved had arrived. Stuart quickly and quietly spoke to his parents and George, explaining the situation. Mr. Little, ever supportive, agreed to drive Henry to the library immediately. Stuart, armed with his sky compass, a length of strong twine, and George's smallest pocket knife, secured himself in Mr. Little's top pocket. The Great Central Library was a silent, enormous fortress of brick and stone. Inside, it was a dizzying world of high, echoing ceilings and towering canyons of bookshelves. To Stuart, standing in the massive, hushed main hall, the library felt like a lost city, a place where the giants, the humans, stored their knowledge, forgetting that their structures created an entirely different world for the smaller inhabitants. Henry was in despair. "It's hopeless. The main reading room alone has 50,000 volumes. It could be in a crack, between pages, or swept up by the cleaning staff." "It is not hopeless, Henry," Stuart squeaked, climbing onto Henry's shoulder and tapping the sky compass. "The compass knows where it is. It points toward the third aisle in the history section. Now, we need a distraction." The librarian, a towering, stern woman named Mrs. Peter, was patrolling the aisles. Her soft shoes were silent on the marble floor, but to Stuart, each step was the approach of a catastrophic earthquake. Stuart directed Henry to sneeze loudly near the children's section. When Mrs. Peter hurried off to shush Henry, Stuart made his move. He lowered himself to the floor using his twine, landing softly in the vast expanse of the carpet. His adventure began. The floor was a treacherous landscape of dust, motes the size of small pillows, overlooked pennies that loomed like metal shields, and the great black shadows cast by the lowest bookshelves. Stuart checked his compass. It pointed straight toward the history aisle. He found an excellent mode of transport, a single, discarded roller skate George had accidentally kicked under a table. Using his twine as a makeshift tow rope, Stuart pulled the roller skate up onto a strip of wood and used his knife to carefully cut the twine. He wrapped the twine around the wheel, turning the skate into a large, clumsy scooter, steering by leaning and pushing off the baseboards with his feet. He zipped through the cavernous hall, a tiny blur under the oppressive silence of the great library. Stuart reached the history section. The sky compass was blazing blue, vibrating excitedly. The microfusion battery was close, but the compass pointed up. High up, toward the fifth shelf, where the books were bound in faded, heavy leather. The shelves were a vast, multi-tiered mountain range. Stuart found a path by climbing the pull chain of a light fixture, rappelling across a gap onto a protruding dust cover, and finally reaching the base of the lowest shelf. The distance between the shelves was like climbing from one floor of a skyscraper to the next. He used the spines of the books as steps, wedging his tiny hands and feet into the space where the spine met the shelf. He was halfway up the third shelf when he realized the source of the danger. The third shelf held ancient, rarely used volumes. One such volume, a massive tome titled Ancient European Dynasties, had been carelessly replaced, resting on the corner of the shelf rather than sitting flush. It was balanced precariously. Stuart felt the small shudder of the floor. Mrs. Peter was approaching. As the giant librarian walked down the adjacent aisle, the slight vibrations of her steps caused the shelf to tremble. The giant book tilted, slid, and then began to fall. Thwump. The book slammed down onto the shelf below, causing a massive domino effect. Stuart was caught in the middle of a book avalanche. Heavy, leather-bound books rained down around him, crashing into the shelves and spilling open. Stuart dove for cover behind the remaining stack of books. When the noise finally stopped, the aisle floor was covered in a chaotic, deep layer of loose pages, cracked leather, and the shredded remains of paper bookmarks. His compass was still pointing up, but the path was gone, replaced by a deep, new chasm between the shelves. Worse, the disaster had created the paper sea. The avalanche of pages had created a disorganized, shifting landscape of smooth, slick paper that covered the floor and flowed down the base of the shelving unit. Stuart realized the battery must have fallen into one of the volumes that crashed open. He located the specific book that had caused the avalanche, The Lost Chronicles of Byzantium. It had cracked open on impact, scattering its contents onto the paper sea below. Stuart slid down a fallen sheet of parchment, landing on the slippery, slick surface of a printed map of ancient Greece. The paper sea was treacherous. It was easy to slide, but nearly impossible to push off from, like trying to swim in thick syrup. He had to get to the scattered pages of Byzantium. He needed a boat. He found one, a discarded, heavy cardboard name tag left behind by a conference attendee. Using his twine, he fixed a small, stiff piece of paper as a sail. He used a tiny bit of glue he carried, saved from an old model airplane kit, to keep the sail rigid. He launched his tiny cardboard boat onto the paper sea. Using a straightened paperclip as a paddle, Stuart navigated the shifting currents of air and the gentle slopes of the stacked pages. It was slow, painstaking work, but his unique vantage point allowed him to see the landscape of the paper mess in a way no human ever could. He eventually reached the scattered, yellowed pages of the Lost Chronicles of Byzantium. The pages were huge, like tents in the wind. Stuart anchored his boat to a loose thread on a page border and began to search. The microfusion battery was so tiny, it could be hidden anywhere, tucked into the crease of a page, or lost under a single word of text. His sky compass was vibrating furiously, pointing toward the centerfold of the largest piece of parchment. Stuart pushed his way into the deep, dark valley of the book's gutter. He found it. The microfusion battery case, no bigger than a dried bean, was wedged firmly into the spine crease, shining slightly with its own residual power. But the heat it gave off, though faint to a human, was a strong beacon to the library's other tiny inhabitants. As Stuart reached for the case, a shadow fell over him. It wasn't Mrs. Peter, it was the true guardian of the library's underworld. Rufus the rat. Rufus was a massive, scarred, battle-hardened sewer rat. To Stuart, he was a monster, a hairy, clawed beast with yellowed teeth and eyes like black pebbles. Rufus had been drawn by the heat and the strange, electric scent of Henry's creation. He saw the battery as a novel, warm pebble to add to his hoard. Well, Rufus rasped, his voice a dry, grating sound. Look what the dust bunny dragged in. A juicy little appetizer and a shiny new toy. Rufus lunged, his claws scraping the paper. Stuart, though terrified, reacted instantly. He was small, but he was fast, and he had learned to sail the pond by understanding wind and friction. He grabbed the microfusion battery and leaped onto his cardboard boat. He knew he couldn't fight Rufus, but he could use the environment. He spotted a huge, empty soda can, discarded long ago, now resting on its side at the edge of the paper landscape. I need friction. Stuart squeaked. Rufus charged, his teeth snapping. Stuart, pulling the twine, sailed his boat directly toward the soda can. He managed to jump onto the slick metal surface just as Rufus's head smashed into the boat, destroying it in a shower of cardboard and string. Stuart scrambled to the high, curved lip of the can. Rufus tried to climb the smooth metal, slipping and cursing. You can't catch me, slowpoke. Stuart taunted, knowing he had seconds. He needed a way down and a way out. He looked back at the bookshelf canyon. He saw the dangling pull chain from the light fixture, his way back to Henry. He knew he couldn't reach it. The jump was too far. Then he remembered the old model airplane kit. He still had one tiny and used, stiff plastic wing. Stuart took the wing and the twine. He tied the twine securely around the microfusion battery case. He then tied the loose end of the twine to the plastic wing. He climbed to the very top edge of the soda can and jumped off the side, falling rapidly toward the ground. He didn't drop the battery. Instead, he threw the battery and wing assembly out ahead of him, toward the light fixture chain. The lightweight plastic wing, combined with the mass of the battery, acted like a tiny, perfect kite. It caught a draft of air from the overhead vents. The tiny kite soared, the microfusion battery pulling it forward. It sailed beautifully, a tiny, improvised machine of rescue. It snagged perfectly on the lowest loop of the light fixture chain, dangling there, swinging like a pendulum. Stuart hit the ground, landing safely in a pile of soft, old cloth George had unknowingly dropped months ago. He quickly retrieved his twine, pulled himself up the cloth, and then climbed the light fixture chain to retrieve Henry's glowing masterpiece. Rufus, exhausted and defeated, could only watch, his fury contained within the large, slippery can. Stuart returned the way he came, scootering back across the main hall on the roller skate, using the cover of a passing janitor's cart to conceal his final approach. He met Henry and Mr. Little outside. Henry was beside himself with relief. Stuart, you found it. How? It was lost in that sea of papers. Henry stared at the tiny battery case in Stuart's paw. It was on a map of Byzantium, wedged in the spine of a book about dynasties, Stuart explained concisely. And it required a cardboard boat and a plastic kite to retrieve. Henry laughed, a huge, relieved sound that echoed off the library walls. Only you, Stuart. Only you could see that vast, chaotic mess as a navigable world. Mr. Little smiled, pulling Stuart gently into his coat pocket. You see, Henry, the greatest adventures aren't always about going far away. Sometimes they are about going into the deep complexities of things right under our noses. They returned home. Stuart, tired but deeply satisfied, finally placed the sky compass back in his thimble. Its electric blue glow faded. The mission was complete. Stuart realized that his boredom had been a giant's boredom, judging the world by its immense scale. But the world he truly belonged to, the tiny, intricate world of dust motes, gutters, and hidden mechanisms, was always there. It was full of its own dangers, Rufus the rat, its own challenges, the paper sea, and its own extraordinary rewards, saving Henry's life's work. He no longer felt settled or bored. He was a hero in a world that only he could truly navigate. He was small, but his purpose, his cunning, and his courage were bigger than any book in the great central library. And that was the most satisfying adventure of all. That was quite the grand adventure through the library. Stuart's small size proved to be his greatest advantage. If you like, we could explore what Henry plans to power with the microfusion battery next, or perhaps detail one of the Wasp's great sailing voyages. Subscribe the channel for more stories and like the video. Thank you.